Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about something that is a little bit daunting, and that is how you can learn any single language in the entire world from scratch. We're going to be talking about the underlying ideas behind that statement and the steps that you can take in order to make that come true. So one of the things that I am a huge believer in, and you can see this in all of my previous videos, is personal responsibility. And now that we are all basically stuck at home and that it's really impossible for us to go to a college or to a an institution where we can learn languages from other people, I think that it is a great time to explore everything that is out there in the internet and to make good use of all of those resources. And I can guarantee you that everything that you will find in the internet is more than enough for you to be able to learn a language. Also, another disclaimer, and this, I don't think I have talked about this a lot, but I just read this great book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. I thoroughly recommend it. And she basically was talking about the difference between people who are gifted and the difference between the people who master a particular skill. And those two don't necessarily correlate. So basically the conclusion of her entire book was that people who were consistent with an activity throughout the years were actually the most successful, and not necessarily the ones who had an advantage from the start. So that is a great motivator if you don't think that you have the capabilities to learn a language from home. I guarantee you that you can if you keep being consistent and if you have the discipline to practice every single day, because at the end of the day, like everything, it comes down to practice. So keep inside those 10,000 hours. What we're going to be talking about today is the 3 most important steps that you can take, or that you should take, before you start learning a language. So here we go. So the first step, guys, and something that you can't really go without if you're going to take languages seriously, is something where you can write all of your vocabulary list. And it can't be like a piece of paper that you just let loose and then lose the other day. It has to be like a nice notebook or an iPad or Anki, for example. I know a lot of people use Anki. I've read in the comments. I personally use my iPad. I love my wallpaper, but in any case, I think that this is really indispensable, and I suggest that you really invest in something nice where you can write, like a nice notebook. Or I know the iPad is more expensive, but if you're able to afford that, that would be good. I saved to get myself an iPad, so that was really nice that I was able to do that. But anyway, I just think that you guys should invest in something nice to write with, because this is ultimately going to be your time machine. And by that, I mean that it is important that you write everything down, you know, like the vocab list that I've talked in my polyglot routine video. But most importantly, it is important that you return to them. Like any single class, like any single exam, this is basically something that you're going to do for the rest of your life. And if you want to get good at it, you're going to have to review and review and review and review over and over and over again. I don't have a great memory. I mean, I don't have a bad memory. I have an average memory, and therefore I have to practice and read and review all of the vocab lists that I write. And I do believe that vocabulary is the most important thing, or like the building blocks of language learning, and therefore I emphasize this so much. Do not skip this step. I don't think that it is something that you can skip. I think it is actually indispensable. So please, guys, get yourself a notebook or something where you write all of your words, and somewhere where you can return to, and where you can review words so that they really get solidified into your long-term memory. So guys, the second step is really easy actually, and you can do this with any single language, and that would be to break down the language into its most basic components, or in other words, in its most basic vocabulary. So what I mean by this is that depending on the language, you will have different goals. So for example, when I was learning Italian, my goal was not really to start understanding the language, because the lexical similarity with Spanish was so great that I was able to already understand a little bit. And even if I just watched a newscast in Italian, I would be able to sort of like get the gist of what the conversation was or what the dialogue was. Whereas for a different language, my goal would be different. So now that I'm learning, for example, Swedish, my goal every single time that I watch something in Swedish or that I listen to the language is to understand a little bit, even if it's just one word, to get sort of a clue of what the conversation conversation is about. So for example, if I was watching a series on Netflix in Swedish, I would just look at a small scene and kind of like try to analyze it and do a small vocabulary autopsy, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is that I would be already having like my list of vocabulary that I already know, which is very simple, like children or man or women. And then when I'm looking at the scene, I would just really try to pay attention to those words, which is great because they're incredibly commonly used, and even small scenes like that, there's a very high possibility or high chance that any of those words is used. So the second thing that I would tell you is that if you are learning a language that you don't really understand yet, or that you wouldn't really understand because it's not part of the family of languages that you already speak in, then I would suggest that you do 3 things. First, I would suggest that you start breaking it down in 3 different steps. So the first thing that I would suggest is that you break down the pronouns, because humans like talking about humans. So learn how to say I, learn how to say you, learn how to say he, her, them, things like that, right? That is the most basic thing that you should learn. The second thing that you should learn is the most common 100 verbs in that language. So that would allow you to understand, for example, sentences that say like she slept or she is sleeping, I eat, she reads, she writes. And because we basically recycle most of the same words every single day, like eating, going, writing, reading, you know, things that are incredibly basic just in daily life, it will just increase your chance of understanding conversations that are a little bit more complicated. And of course, you should learn basic stuff like greetings and saying thank you, you're welcome, bye, you know, like stuff that you would really utilize in a conversation if you were ever confronted with a native speaker. After all of that, you can start learning more random words, you know, like more random nouns like light, lamp, table, turtle, airplane. I would suggest that you start with basic nouns, like completely basic nouns, like the ones that I just said, not nouns that are more complicated, like abstract art and xenophobia and enlightenment. If you want to learn that, that's fine. I just think of languages as a building, and I think that your bases have to be very strong in order for you to be able to have a conversation, a fluent conversation, and then you can add those more advanced concepts at the end. And the third and final step, guys, is to listen and listen and listen over and over and over and over again. And the reason we want to do this is because here is where you're going to have your small victories. And by that I mean that, as some of you know, I talked about this in my quarantine video, which I can link up over here. I have decided to do this kind of like, you know, quarantine language channel where I try to teach myself a language from home. And what I'm doing is that I am taking Netflix and Duolingo in conjunction with each other, and I am, you know, learning some very basic words on Duolingo, which is great. And then I write them on my iPad and I review them, right? Because we have to do that as well. It's not only the Duolingo. And then I go onto Netflix and I just play one scene and I listen to it over and over again and see if I can get any of the words that I've studied. And my idea with this is that eventually, if I memorize enough words, I will be able to get to not a native level or anything, but just to be able to understand the language, which again is my main goal here with just learning a language from scratch, and especially from home. So that is my goal right now, and I can put this little chart over here, and this chart just basically delineates the language fluency levels based on how much vocabulary you know. So for example, as you can see, A1 is equivalent to about 100 words, A2 1,000 words, and C2 is about 16,000 words, right? So if I learn theoretically 16,000 words in Swedish, I will be able to be a native speaker. Obviously that is not true. There are so many other factors to language learning, like pronunciation and just fluidity when it comes to talking, like speed. But at least I think that I will be able to understand the language if I do this, right? So I hope that you guys have liked this video. I hope that any of these ideas help you at all, and I am sure that with enough discipline and enough self-dedication, you will be able to learn as many languages as you want. So subscribe down below and leave me a nice comment telling me what your favorite language is.